Welcome to Public Affairs Roundtable, a discussion of current events in the nation and around the world and how they affect the people of Indiana. Here's your moderator, Larry Lough.
We will depart today from the usual commentary on politics and economics to talk about Christmas. More specifically, Christians, Christmas, and the secular society. We're going to talk about what Christmas is and how it's changing. Our panelists for today's program are the Reverend Al Kundenreich, pastor of Gethsemane United Methodist Church in Muncie, the Reverend David Hellman, pastor of St. Francis of Assisi's Newman Center at Ball State, and John Rouse, associate professor of political science at Ball State University and producer of this program. John, as the producer of this program, explain to the viewers, the listeners, why it is Public Affairs Roundtable is dealing with Christmas.
Larry, we live in a very pragmatic society, a society that depends upon computers, a very fast-track society in a sense. So I think that Christmas gives us a chance to think in terms of values. Harvey Cox wrote a book several years ago, and he defined the word profane as meaning outside the temple, having to do with this world. So we live in a society that does have to do with this world, and sometimes in terms of our profanity of living in the world, in a sense, we need to think in terms of values, and of course Christmas certainly gives us this opportunity. So that's the reason, because we hear a lot of talk about is Christ in Christmas? How can we put Christ back in Christmas? Do we have a secular society? Secular humanism is a phrase that's used by fundamentalist Christians oftentimes. So I think this is a good opportunity for us to think in terms of this way. And keep in mind, although we're not talking precisely about economics, the Christmas time is a very key time in terms of certain businesses making their due.
Reverend Kundenreich, let's answer that question. Is there Christ in Christmas now?
Sure. Christ has never left the Christmas message. Christmas celebrates the birth of Christ, and it always will as far as I'm concerned. And even though there is a lot of commercial activity at this time of year and the secular world gets involved economically, I don't think that the essence and the heart of Christmas has ever left it.
Has it changed, though, Reverend Hellman? Is there a change in Christmas at all? Or certainly it's, I don't know, we say there's not the traditional Christmas. Christmas is different somehow. It starts before Thanksgiving, certainly immediately after Thanksgiving, the store decorations and all. There's some secularization, isn't there not?
It definitely has been being pushed back. But I keep asking the question, but what gives it its impetus, what gives it its force? Mm-hmm. That there's a dynamism that is behind this feast that is able to carry the secular weight with it. And I don't know if the secular could carry it if it did not have the real Christmas celebration. Otherwise, we're just celebrating a winter holiday. And I personally do not like to celebrate winter.
Isn't it, however, Al, in terms of the point that you make, surely the reason for Christmas is Christ in terms of its origin, but don't you have the concern that Americans in our economic force have gotten, in a sense, too far away from this? Or can you really divide the question in terms of when does Christ end and the economics of Christmas begin?
John, as I look at the way we worship at Christmas time and worship at Easter, Easter is the largest attendance in our worship services. Christmas comes second. I still see lots and lots of people worshiping in the church on Christmas Day, on Christmas Eve, the Sunday before Christmas. I think they know what Christmas is really all about. Now, I know that we go shopping and we spend lots of money, and that all is part of it, and maybe that's the secularization, the cover over what is really at the heart of it. But no, I just choose to believe that the real essence of it is still there.
So you're saying, in a sense, even though about 42% of the American people are churched, Christmas gives those people who are not churched some connection with Christmas that they might not have.
The ability to give to one another and to receive, to exchange love, to perhaps get away from the roughness of daily life, or perhaps the the exchange of problems, maybe to change your mind a while and to love one another and to give to each other, to support one another and affirm one another at this time of year.
I think that it amazes me that that continually comes up. But at Christmas time, we often are in touch with who we want to be and the relationships with people that we perhaps put aside. That how often that is the time that we really reach out to people that we still have memories of or affection for, and yet perhaps have kind of neglected because we've been caught up too busily in all our other activities, responsibilities, and jobs. And now it brings to mind the importance of people for us. It's like also not just for immediate friends, but why is it that our society also is very concerned about those in the nursing home?
That's right.
Why is it that the community doesn't feel comfortable with the cold and the poor and the hungry, and yet wants to do something for those who don't have the opportunity of celebrating Christmas? I see this as kind of like the effect of Christ's presence still working and operating and calling us beyond our everyday experience and relationship with one another. It's kind of like the light, kind of like a star perhaps shining in the darkness saying, this is what we need to be. This is the direction we need to go.
Isn't it, in a sense, in terms of looking at Easter and also Christmas, we don't know for certain when Christ was born.
That's right.
And so is Christmas more, well, certainly Easter in Christian life is much more important than Christmas.
Yes.
Obviously, I guess that's...
John, in regard to the church year really started with Easter, and every Sunday was always seen as an Easter celebration. Lent became the first season in a way to prepare people for their baptism and reception into the Christian community. Advent, leading up to Christmas, became like a secondary Lenten season, a secondary time or point in which people would be received into the church. So Christmas has always been secondary to Easter.
Forgive my skepticism in this case, my bah humbug approach to the how we treat Christmas. But is that not something of, I guess, a paradox that we seem to have this compassion for the poor, for the cold, for the hungry at Christmas time, yet we don't seem to have that emphasis in our society the rest of the year, that we seem to, it's sort of like we're Christians on Sunday, but the rest of the week we do what we damn well please. I mean, is there not that problem?
Well, I hope it has the possibility of kind of carrying through. It's like we celebrate birthdays once a year, and we often are calling to mind somebody who's important to us or their significance. And yes, sometimes we may take that person for granted through the year, but somehow by lifting up that day and celebrating that birthday of a person, we do recognize that our life is affected by and very much enriched by this person's life. And somehow I think Christmas in a way calls up to mind very important, very central kind of events.
It does seem like a cliche, Larry, that we're saying we ought to celebrate Christmas all year, or why don't we give this concern to others at other times of year instead of just at Christmas time? But it's more than a cliche. That is the Christian responsibility. Love was born at Christmas, a love that is not just seasonal, but it is all year round, and that concern does need to be expressed to the homeless and the poor all year round.
Isn't it also a phenomenon in a sense, if you read Christ, you really, or if you read the New Testament, you really have, you have essentially kind of a socialistic kind of document, really. When it's socialistic, meaning in the sense of the society caring for other people. So if that's true, and if it's not, of course you'll tell me, but in a sense we have Christianity as a check upon capitalism. I mean, it is certainly true that people perhaps don't behave in society the other 6 days the way they behave in church. They say that people go to church and then they go out into society and they become these greedy capitalists or whatever. Isn't, in a sense, Christianity a check upon our capitalistic ways in this nation?
I'm really not into the economy at this point, John.
Or a check upon greed, perhaps.
It definitely calls to mind that the human person is more important and more significant than things. And the Christmas event itself, if we look at it as the incarnation of God becoming human, then the human is really the arena in which God is operating, God is active and working. That the Christian understanding is our relationship with God is very much tied up and identified with our relationship with our fellow human beings. That the Christian message is we cannot separate or divorce religion and my daily relationships with others. That with God entering into the human condition and situation, then the story of humanity is also cut up with the story of God. There's no dichotomy, there's no divorce, as some religious groups I think would like us to have.
God so loved the world that he gave us his only Son, and his Son was born at Christmas time. That kind of giving causes us to be giving to others, and instead of just asking ourselves, what can I get out of this? But what can I give you, and what can I give you, and what can I give others? What can I give those people whom I sometimes neglect in the daily course of my life?
Is Christmas then important, I guess, for promoting the ideal or the Christian ideals rather than the practices of Christianity? I mean, is that what we're getting to? That
From my perspective, if one understands Christmas, of God entering into and becoming part of the human story, then one is beginning to understand the meaning that this is something that permeates life itself. It is not just celebrating a nice, pious, romantic, or sentimental event that happened, but then we ask the question, how does Christ enter into the human story today? How is Christ present now with us and among us? So it's like he...
Loving and giving and healing and serving and sharing,
Right.
and making God known among us, yes.
If we look at these issues as they transpire during the year, we hear a certain lot of discussion about politics and economics and the role of Christians in our society. We certainly are not a Christian nation. Sometimes in class, just to shake these kids up, I'll say, we're not a Christian nation, and I hope we never become a Christian nation. That gets them. And then I go ahead to explain, now, we may be a nation of Christians and Jews. We don't focus much upon Islam. But we're not a Christian nation. Should we remain secular in our emphasis as a nation and not become, as Israel is, a Jewish nation, or as Islam is an Islamic nation? Is there too much emphasis upon the secularization?
John, I see us as a nation under God, and we Christians affirm that God has revealed himself most supremely in Jesus the Christ. We need to be sensitive to other religious expressions in our country, and I agree with you that we're not a Christian nation as such, but we are a nation under God. And I think it's important for us to accept other expressions of worship of God that are not necessarily Christian. I think, yeah, pass to you.
I was trying to think in terms of, there are many different ways that Christianity is reflected in the U.S., and some of them I really cannot identify with, and I would not really see as primarily Christian. It may have a structure, it may have a framework that has a label of Christian, but there is also a spirit dimension to that. It's an intangible aspect and reality that cannot be just legislated. And if we were I don't think I would call it a Christian nation, but I think you're speaking more of like a theocracy.
I am, yeah.
A theocratical state, where it is like everything is seen as this is the law of God, and the law of God then necessitates that these laws be carried out. I think the values that flow out of the gospel can be looked at, and if we truly believe that in this Christmas celebration Jesus become human, then what is truly good for humanity will also be very good insofar as laws and practices in our country. But I feel very, very cautious or skeptical about anyone saying that this is the specific Christian response and legislate it. I have qualms on that.
I agree with you.
Even to the point, David, if I can kind of put you on the spot, I mean, there's a big focus by certain Christian groups to make abortions illegal, for example. I mean, that would be one of the, or to have official public school prayers. Are you referring to that kind of focus?
Well, I would separate the abortion issue from the school prayer issue, John. The abortion issue is not a question of just a religious principle, but a question of a question about what is for the well-being of the society as a whole. If a society and community is concerned with all of its citizens, all of its members, then the question of whether or not the unborn is a member within that society, and does it also have some rights, some protection. So it's not like imposing a religious principle upon, but asking a fundamental question that would in a way speak to all the citizens and not just imposing a narrow mindset.
I see what you're saying, but again, I think it addresses the issue of the role of the state. What is the proper role of the state?
And a political issue. I mean, is not abortion a political issue as well as a religious issue, and does not,
and also an economic issue.
Does
too.
not the way that our government operates and what it legalizes and does not legalize and makes illegal help shape or say something about, I don't know, what would we call it, a religious persona that we have if we're not a religious state, at least a personality the nation has religiously?
Well, we also have other laws that we generally have accepted, like murder is generally regarded as against our civil laws for some reason. Theft is regarded as against, the rights of the citizens. And so the question there is, it's not that we do not have laws that are reflective of religious positions, but it's also flowing out of a sense of our understanding of what is good for the protection of the citizens and all the citizens. What is the role of government is the basic question you're asking now.
Yeah, because as we all know, churches are not taxed, and I mean that is certainly an advantage for churches not to be taxed.
And we do appreciate it.
One thing we would not want government to do is to prescribe a certain prayer that ought to be said in public institutions. I do affirm the law of the land at that point.
And as we look at the historical beginnings of our country, we certainly find such great diversity in expression. The fact that Roger Williams in 1635 was escaping the Massachusetts colony just to get away from the more orthodox approaches, and it's still with us.
Do we see an evolution, I guess, in this religious persona we're talking about, if that's what we're talking about? Do we see an evolution? Has it changed since we've declared our independence and we framed our Constitution and what we have today? Is this an evolutionary thing? Is it changing? I mean, we talk about how Christmas always has...
dimension or Christmas dimension? I'm not sure.
Both. Either.
I would say that Christmas has an enduring value, and because it has an enduring value, it has continued to kind of build through. I see the business community saying that this is a very powerful event. If we are in some way able to latch onto that or tie onto that, then we can also promote our interest. But I never see the business being able to overcome that and totally turn around the meaning of the Christmas event, but rather it relies on the power of the Christmas event to carry it.
Yeah.
Is it still changing? Are there different attempts? Are there stronger efforts? I mean, as we look at church membership or if we look at church attendance, some fluctuations, is there likely to be some change in that? Or
I do not see anything presently working against the celebration of Christmas as the birth of Christ really within our country.
I have to agree with that.
If I could get us back to the Christian year, we might think, because we are emphasizing upon how can the spirit of Christmas be year-long and not just for a couple of weeks. In terms of the challenges, let's call them challenges, not problems, that the parishioners in your respective parishes meet, how is that different? Sometimes, Al, You know, I don't have to deal with so many of the sad events. You know, when I see you in the pulpit or at church, it seems like there's a focus upon some deaths and that kind of thing, sadness. What are some of the problematic challenges that you face as pastors?
Especially at Christmas time.
Well, at Christmas time and also throughout the year.
One of the messages that comes out of Christmas is the message of hope, the message of new beginning, of life, of comfort, of caring. When the problems of life hit us, it is important for us year-round to remember that the God who came to us in Christ, bringing redemption, bringing love, bringing caring, bringing compassion, is at work in us, no matter what those problems are, year-round. And there's a certainty and a sense of security there that God is, in fact, at work. Whether I recognize that or not, or even appreciate that or not, He's doing that.
I think also in regard to the economic aspect in our country, often people have a sense of worth according to how much money they have. And yet if we don't over-sentimentalize the whole Christmas scene, it's a scene of a very poor couple giving birth to a child with very little. And it can also express then that our worth is not based on what we have or don't have, and that there is a fundamental worth of each human person without anything.
I like that.
How do your specific roles, jobs, duties change this time of year?
Well, Larry, in my experience, at Christmas time, I spend a lot more time than the rest of the year dealing with individuals who find it rough to go through the holidays, who remember Christmases with mom or dad or grandma or some other special person in their lives, and now comes a Christmas without a loved one. That brings lots of needs to the fore, sometimes depressions, sometimes a need to be reminded that God cares, that He is with us, Emmanuel, God with us, in the midst of these special times. I spend a lot more time one-on-one with people who really suffer at this time of year.
Our Advent season is a liturgical season that's really geared toward preparing ourselves for the coming of Christ. Basically asking, what are the obstacles within ourselves that prevent Christ from really being a part of our life? In what way? What are the barriers perhaps we've erected? What are the obstacles? What are the things that need to be cleared away? And so it's a recognition that we are moving toward the fullness of Christ reigning in everything, and yet we're not there. Mm-hmm. So we're on a journey. Where are we on this journey? How are we moving toward this? And so it's a spiritual preparation time for people to really look into their life, where they're going, and what values are directing their life.
David, you at Ball State, of course, address a certain group. Are there any particular differences in terms of dealing with students at this time of year or during the year than I'm sure it's different than being a priest in a quote regular parish, so to speak. The parish at Ball State must be different.
I would say the students are very much caught up in the whole Christmas party celebration once they get back from Thanksgiving, with all the different Christmas events that all the organizations are participating in. So it's rather important that we add another dimension to that for them. Of adding what we can, of trying to take that, yes, their joy, their delight, their celebration, but let's channel it definitely in a religious way. And like this coming Saturday, we have this is not really liturgical, but we have a midnight mass for celebration of Christmas before they go home, and it's an opportunity then of having them celebrate among themselves here the Christmas event, which will be very much caught in the whole caroling and Christmas songs, which all those Christmas carols carry so much of the celebration of the religious event. So,
we see at this time of year newspaper articles, we see reporters on television saying, how do you beat Christmas blahs? How do you beat the depression that inevitably comes with this holiday? From your point of view, from people who counsel people in depression, what advice do you have?
God is a God who comforts, who understands, Larry, who cares, who knows how we feel and accepts us and understands us in the midst of those feelings. And as indeed his name shall be called Emmanuel, which means God with us, to help people understand that in the midst of their sadness, God is with them, comforting with his strength the weaknesses that we bring to this time of year.
And if you look at the Christmas event, the story of a family leaving their homeland,
Yes.
going into a city where they don't know anyone, having a very non-reception or openness to them, but being closed out, being forced really in poverty into the stable or with the animals, that definitely does allow one who's experienced aloneness to identify with, yes, it was in that situation that God became part of us and one with us.
That's right.
And is this situation where Christianity then plays even a more important role in people's lives individually?
I would think so.
This is where you're more useful to people who might not otherwise turn to the church.
So we'll affirm the darkness and say God is even present there.
And he brings light
Right.
to that darkness.
If I could again get you back to the Christian year, the fundamentalist Christians in the last several years have been talking about a resurgence in church attendance, but yet I think it's about the same. I'd say about 42 to 45%. Why do you think that more Americans are not, quote, regular members of any particular parish or church?
Because of time in 25 words or less, I guess.
I would take a guess, John, that it doesn't meet their needs to the point where they would go more frequently than they do. They don't feel the need to worship or to put life into a spiritual perspective.
And sometimes a fear of entering into groups where one is not known or one does not know others. There's a lot of fear of venturing on our own, of getting into groups that we are unfamiliar with.
Well, we'll have to end on that down note, but thanks to our panelists.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas.
Same to
And
you.
thanks to our panelists, David Hellman, Reverend Al Kindenreich, John Rouse, for their commentary and comments here today. I'm Larry Lough. Thank you for being with us.
If you have comments regarding this program, please address them to John Rouse, Box 149, Muncie, Indiana 47305. The producer for Public Affairs Roundtable is John Rouse. Associate producers are Cecil Bohannon and Bill Mosier. This program is a production of University Media Services, the Department of Political Science, and radio and television stations on the campus of Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana.